We've had by now well over half a decade of a very intense debate about what is nowadays often simply called the crisis of democracy. One of the peculiar characteristics of that debate is that on the one hand, plenty of people are willing to say that the crisis is ultimately the fault of, to put it bluntly, the people themselves, the great unwashed, so-called ordinary citizens, as if there were any others really, who basically brought all kinds of political miseries upon themselves. After all, they voted for Brexit. After all, they voted for Trump. On the other side of this debate is, of course, the position according to which it's not the fault of the people at all. It's the fault of nefarious, or as it's often put, corrupt elites. Now, as different as these positions are, they do actually have one thing in common. They are both about groups of people, be it the many or be it the few. And what this kind of framing of our political moment tends to obscure, in my view, is the role of, to put it again rather bluntly, political institutions. And in particular, the role and also the health of institutions which, ever since the 19th century, were deemed to be absolutely indispensable for the proper functioning of representative democracies. Political parties on the one hand, and professional news organizations on the other. I put them together under the heading critical infrastructure of democracy. Maybe it's worth explaining for a second what I mean by that term. Nowadays, nobody's really against infrastructure. Everybody is in favor of, fixing roads and bridges. Everybody is in favor of updating or extending digital infrastructure. But what is infrastructure really about? Well, on one level, you might say, it's about people reaching others and being reached by them or becoming reachable by them. That applies to roads, it applies to trains, but it also applies to something like the post office, which in the United States, for instance, has become highly politicized. Now, this core intuition about reaching others and being reached by them also has a political meaning, also has a particular significance for the health of representative democracies. Because essentially it refers to the importance of using our basic communicative freedoms and rights. Or to put it more simply, basic rights such as free speech, free assembly, and free association. I can write op-ed pieces and send them to friends and family, to strangers where they will probably end up in the spam folder. I can demonstrate all by myself out on the street with a self-made poster. But if I can place my op-ed in a newspaper, or if I can join a party or some other organization that helps me get out my message, obviously the game changes fundamentally. And the ability to reach others and be reached by them is strengthened if we basically have organizations in place that allow us to do this. This is the aspect of the crisis of democracy to which, in my view, we haven't paid enough attention. And what I'd like to do is remind us of basically two core functions which the institutions I'm referring to, political parties on the one hand, professional news organizations on the other, two functions which are absolutely crucial for the overall health of representative democracies. First, and at the risk of saying the blindingly obvious, these kinds of institutions stage political conflict. Maybe it's not so obvious to say this, given that today many commentators, also politicians, sometimes want to make us believe that democracy ultimately is really about civility or even about agreement and consensus. With all due respect, that's not truly the case. Democracy is about conflict. It's about conflict within certain borders. It's about conflict within institutions. Democracy is also not, as many people in Germany like to say, about Zusammenhalt or cohesion. The word Zusammenhalt has had an astonishing semantic career in the last 5 or 6 years. No political party will issue a program without stressing that Zusammenhalt, cohesion, is absolutely indispensable. But again, it's not quite right to say that democracy is ultimately only about people sort of sticking together in a certain way, let alone all agreeing. In democracies, conflict is legitimate. The point of democracy, to a large degree, is about enabling us to deal with conflicts in a peaceful manner. What's worth adding is that, of course, if people manage to deal with conflict in a peaceful manner, it can actually strengthen the overall cohesion of democratic political systems. This is not a new insight. You can go back as far as Machiavelli, for instance, or more recently in the history of ideas, you go back to the great German sociologist Georg Simmel, for instance, or even more recently, the great post-war sociologist Ralph Dahrendorf. They all emphasized that conflict and cohesion are not necessarily opposites, but that if conflict is done the right way, it can actually strengthen the overall cohesion of a democracy. That, of course, poses the question, well, what does it mean to do conflict in the right way? Allow me to make two suggestions in this context. Conflicts can take all kinds of shapes. Conflicts are never objectively given. It's part of the art of politics to basically shape them in certain ways, to stage them in certain ways. This has a quasi-aesthetic dimension. And that's what party politicians do, to some degree also what professional news organizations can do when, for instance, they start a campaign where they say, look, here's an overlooked issue, here's a big social problem to which we should pay more attention. But the crucial thing is that for these kinds of conflicts to be ultimately productive and strengthen cohesion, they need to remain within two borders. What do I mean? Well, for one thing, those who engage in conflict must not do what I think especially right-wing authoritarian populists always tend to do, which is to basically question or outright deny the standing of their adversaries, to basically suggest that certain politicians, but even certain citizens, don't truly belong to the polity. When, if I may use a rather drastic, or quote a rather drastic formulation, when ex-President Trump told some of his political adversaries that they should go back to their, I'm only quoting, shithole countries, that was a way of saying, I don't even recognize you as a proper adversary, and you don't truly belong here in the first place. This is the kind of thing that one must not do in a political conflict. Because in a certain way, if I don't even recognize the adversary, or if I treat the adversary as an enemy or as somebody who doesn't truly belong, it's hard to see how ultimately conflict could in any way be productive. Secondly, and this might sound very naive, especially to any journalists who might be watching this video, those who engage in conflict must also respect a basic set of facts. I know. It's not always easy to agree on what the facts truly are. It's not true that the facts speak for themselves. None of us has ever heard the facts speak for themselves. And yet, as Hannah Arendt pointed out a long time ago, politics relies on a distinction between facts and opinions. For her, politics ultimately was about the free play of opinions and also political judgments, but opinions and judgments that respected the facts. If you tell me that, oh, there's nothing going on with climate at all, or if you tell me that climate issues are an invention by the Chinese government to hurt the West economically, it's very hard to see how we could possibly get into anything like a productive political conflict. After all, there on one level is nothing to talk about. There is no shared of facts, there is no common understanding of the world to allow us then to disagree in a meaningful kind of way. So conflict is indispensable, but conflict within these two hard borders, which I've tried to outline. Allow me to add one other thought about the particular role of political parties and professional news organizations, and again frame it a little bit along the lines of what kind of boundaries they have to observe. This point relates to the importance of pluralism. It's fairly obvious that in a democracy we need pluralism at the level of party systems. Of course there needs to be a meaningful choice among parties. And it's a banality to say that democracy requires media pluralism as well. It's a hallmark of all the countries where democracy has been destroyed by, again, if I may put it so drastically, right-wing authoritarian populists, that they've also all attacked media pluralism and drastically reduced it. All that, you might say, is fairly obvious. It's less obvious why we also need pluralism inside particular organizations, such as political parties and professional news organizations. When people talk about things like pluralism within parties, or what is sometimes simply called intra-party democracy, some observers who hear this tend to roll their eyes. For them, this kind of idea of the importance of intra-party democracy reminds them of Oscar Wilde's famous quip that the problem with socialism is that it takes too many evenings. The idea being that nobody ultimately is all that fond of endless meetings and debates in pubs, or at least in the old days, smoke-filled rooms where, people endlessly pontificate about certain ideas and policies and principles, and where the person who either is the most educated or who has nothing else to do and hence can stick around for the longest generally tends to win the debate. These sorts of worries and concerns are certainly legitimate. But think of what happens if you don't have any pluralism and no democracy inside parties at all. What you won't generate is anything like a legitimate opposition. It's true that people join parties because they are partisans. They agree on a broad set of political principles. But no principle applies itself. There's always room for debate and how particular principles have to cash out as particular policies at a particular moment. That requires discussion. The more discussion one has, maybe the more ideas are on the table, the more evidence can be brought to bear on an issue. And importantly, people learn how to disagree with each other without calling each other traitors to the cause or anything of that sort. So just as democracies at large need a legitimate opposition, also inside political parties, you need something like a legitimate opposition, and you need a stance of what you might call critical loyalty. If political parties are either one-man shows, example, Geert Wilders, the right-wing populist in the Netherlands, who literally is the only member of his own political party, or if parties are effectively transformed into personality cults, think of what Donald Trump did to the Republicans in the United States, then this sense of a legitimate opposition inside the organization or a legitimate stance of critical loyalty basically disappears. And why does that matter? It matters because once these sorts of things disappear, we are well on the road to January 6th. If you don't have anybody inside your organization who can restrain you in the name of shared principles, if you are called a traitor to the cause as soon as you disagree with the leader, we have a problem. And also, as soon as parties give up on the idea of having genuine programmatic commitments, again, forgive me, the Republicans are a prime example. You may recall that at their last major convention in 2020, they refused to formulate a new program. They simply added something along the lines of whatever Trump wants, we will want to agree with and we are on board with to this 2016 program. The meaning of elections changes. An organization can have a long-term time horizon and can afford to lose an election. If it's all about one individual, the game changes. And especially with older individuals, there's a question how long they're going to wait before they might get another win. So, as unattractive as it might seem to some people, internal pluralism, internal democracy is absolutely crucial for the overall health of democracies. And when you think, one more time maybe, of today's prominent right-wing authoritarian populists, it's not an accident that all of them lead their own political parties in a highly authoritarian way, that they do not truly tolerate any internal dissent, and that basically complete absence of pluralism is what characterizes their own organizations. So those constitutions or those party regulations which insist on internal pluralism, I think, do point us to something very important. And the same thought, I believe, applies to news media organizations. It's not the same point as saying that the media must never be partisan. I'm not sure that that's right. After all, we used to have, for instance, social democratic newspapers. Nobody thought that this was necessarily the end of democracy, as long as people knew what that meant, as long as these sorts of things were entirely transparent. But it still is important that you basically don't just get one party line, but that there is a sense of a plurality of opinions and judgments, and that citizens are ultimately put into a position of choosing meaningfully amongst these different options, and basically also can see others meaningfully engage in conflict in such a way that the outcome of the conflict, even if by definition usually only one side can truly have the sense of having won, ultimately the outcome is more cohesion for democracy overall.